My family spent 20 years treating my cousin like a prince and me like the hired help. So my grandfather, from beyond the grave, left him a golden inheritance that bankrupted him and gave me everything else. My world, for as long as I can remember, has been my grandfather's farm. It's not a sprawling ranch, just 100 acres of rolling hills, a sturdy old farmhouse, and a barn that smells of sawdust and motor oil. Growing up, it was my sanctuary. While my parents worked, I spent my days with Grandpa. He taught me how to fix a tractor, how to read the sky for rain, and how to tell the difference between a fool and a wise man. My connection to him and his land was the most important thing in my life. The stakes for me were never about money. They were about legacy, about honoring the memory of the only person in my family who ever truly saw me. The villains in my story are my Aunt Karen and her son, my cousin Ethan. To the rest of the family, Ethan was the golden child. He was destined for greatness, despite having no discernible talents or ambition. Aunt Karen would spend every holiday gathering bragging about his potential, while he sat on the couch, scrolling on his phone. They viewed my love for the farm with disdain. To them, my dirty hands and work boots were signs of my station, proof that I was the simple blue-collar branch of the family tree. I remember one Christmas, Ethan received a brand new laptop. I received a pair of work gloves with a note from my aunt that said, "So you can keep helping your grandfather with his chores." They weren't just dismissive, they were cruel in a soft, smiling, condescending way. Grandpa passed away peacefully at the age of 88. A week later, the family gathered in the stuffy, wood-paneled office of his lawyer, Mr. Harrison, for the reading of the will. The air was thick with tension. My Aunt Karen was practically vibrating with anticipation, patting Ethan's knee. I sat in the corner, expecting nothing, just wanting the whole ordeal to be over so I could go back to the farm and grieve in peace. Mr. Harrison cleared his throat and began to read. "To my grandson Liam," he read, and I sat up straighter. "I leave all the tools in my workshop, my collection of woodworking magazines, and my old rocking chair on the porch. May they serve you as well as they have served me." A barely suppressed snort came from my aunt. Then came the next part. "To my beloved grandson Ethan," Mr. Harrison continued. "In recognition of the bright, golden future he has ahead of him, I leave my most prized possession, my entire golden inheritance, which is secured in the sealed crates in the main barn." Golden inheritance? My grandfather never mentioned anything about gold. He was a farmer, not a pirate. I looked over at Ethan and Karen. Their faces were alight with pure, unrestrained greed. They were trying to look solemn, but they looked like two people who had just won the lottery. I felt a strange mix of emotions. Grief, for one. But beneath it, a flicker of confusion. It seemed theatrical. So unlike my pragmatic, down-to-earth grandfather. For a split second, I imagined Grandpa winking at me from beyond the grave, and I felt a strange, unsettling sense of calm. The moment we left the lawyer's office, the celebration began. Ethan was already talking about buying a sports car. Aunt Karen was planning a trip to Europe. They turned to me in the parking lot. "Well, Liam," Karen said, her voice dripping with fake sympathy. "Make sure you get your old magazines and that dusty chair off the property by the end of the month. Ethan will need the space when he sells the place." They didn't even know what was on the farm. They just assumed it was all part of their golden windfall. My first move was to do exactly as I was told. I didn't argue. I didn't protest. I nodded politely and said, "Of course, Aunt Karen. I'll just need to arrange a time to catalog Grandpa's tools properly, as per the will." This absolute, unquestioning compliance was the key. I would play my part as the disinherited, simple-minded nephew. Their arrogance and my feigned submission was the perfect bait. And they took it. Ethan and Karen didn't just celebrate, they went on a victory tour. They immediately started spending money they didn't have. Ethan put a down payment on a brand new, fire engine red convertible. Karen booked a non-refundable first-class trip around the world. Their smugness escalated into outright tyranny. I received a formal, typed letter from Karen, not a text, a letter, informing me that I had 2 weeks to remove my meager effects before they would be disposed of. They were so blinded by their greed that they couldn't see the trap closing around them. My systemic nightmare wasn't a punishment, it was a sacred and monumental task. As the recipient of the tools and other items, I had to work with the executor, Mr. Harrison, to catalog everything. I spent the next 2 weeks in the barn and the farmhouse, going through every single thing my grandfather had owned. Every wrench, every saw blade, every piece of antique furniture, every fading photograph. It was an emotionally exhausting process. I was alone, surrounded by the ghosts of a man I loved, carefully documenting the legacy they considered junk. Each item held a memory, and each memory solidified my resolve to see his final plan through to the end. I wasn't entirely alone. Allies emerged from the woodwork, just as my grandfather must have known they would. My grandfather's best friend and next-door neighbor, a retired farmer named George. George had watched me grow up. He saw Ethan's new car roar down the driveway one afternoon while I was hauling trash out of the barn. He just came over, shook his head, and handed me a cold bottle of water. "Your grandpa was no fool, Liam," George said, his voice raspy. "He saw everything. He always knew who had a good heart, and who was just a greedy peacock. Don't you worry. The old man had a plan." His words were a balm to my soul. The lawyer and executor, Mr. Harrison. At first, he was the picture of professional neutrality. But as he witnessed Karen and Ethan's behavior, their gloating phone calls, their demands to expedite the process, I saw a subtle shift. A hint of distaste flickered in his eyes. During one of our calls, he calmly explained a crucial detail. "Liam, the will is very specific. Ethan inherits the contents of the crates. You inherit the specified items. The remainder of the estate, the house, the land, the equipment, will be liquidated to pay the estate taxes, and any remaining funds will be distributed." He paused. "It's a very clever will." It was in that moment I knew he wasn't just an executor. He was a silent partner in my grandfather's final lesson. I was there every day, working from sunup to sundown, respectfully handling my grandfather's possessions. Ethan would occasionally show up, kick a tire on the tractor, and ask when he would get his gold. The contrast between us was stark, and the few neighbors and family friends who stopped by saw it clearly. The lowest point came on a hot, dusty afternoon. I was in the barn, covered in grime, wrestling a heavy old anvil onto a dolly. Ethan pulled up in his new convertible, the top down, rap music blasting. He didn't even get out. He just leaned over the passenger seat and smirked. "Still playing with rusty junk, cousin?" he yelled over the music. "Enjoy it. I'm off to look at yachts." He sped off, leaving me in a cloud of dust and exhaust. For a moment, I felt the full, crushing weight of 20 years of being looked down upon. I sank onto an old wooden stool, put my head in my hands, and felt a wave of despair wash over me. I felt like the loser they always told me I was. The battleground wasn't a courtroom. It was appraisal day. Mr. Harrison had scheduled it, a necessary step to assess the total value of the estate for tax purposes. 2 professional appraisers arrived in a quiet sedan, their faces serious. This was it. Aunt Karen and Ethan arrived shortly after, practically giddy. They led the way to the barn, pointing to the 24 large, sealed wooden crates stacked in the center. "This is it," Ethan announced proudly. "The golden inheritance." Mr. Harrison, holding a copy of the will, cleared his throat. "Before we appraise the real property, we must appraise the entire contents of the estate. That includes the contents of these crates." Karen bristled. "That's not necessary. It's gold. You can look up the price." "I'm afraid it is necessary," Mr. Harrison said, his voice firm but calm. "The will grants him the contents, not a cash value. We must see what's inside." With a crowbar, I pried open the first crate. Inside, nestled in straw, was not the gleam of bullion. It was a collection of rocks, each one meticulously and very obviously spray-painted a cheap, glittery gold. We opened the next crate. It was filled with cheap, gold-plated commemorative coins from a home shopping network, still in their plastic cases. The next crate held dozens of worthless, gilded picture frames. Crate after crate was opened, revealing a mountain of my grandfather's bizarre, worthless collection of gold-colored junk. The nuke evidence wasn't just that the inheritance was worthless. It was that it was a giant, magnificent joke. Ethan was speechless. Karen's face went from smug to confused to a deep, blotchy red. She started stammering about a mistake, a theft. Mr. Harrison, my expert ally, calmly pressed the advantage. "There is no mistake," he said, adjusting his glasses. "The will is airtight. Ethan inherits the contents of these crates. Now, about the taxes." He explained it with the cold, clear logic of the law. The estate's value was not in the worthless rocks. It was in the land, the house, the farm equipment, all of which had been appraised at just over $2 million. Aunt Karen and Ethan had already signed legally binding documents formally accepting their inheritance and its associated tax burdens. They were now personally on the hook for an inheritance tax calculated on the entire value of the estate. A tax bill that would be in the hundreds of thousands of dollars. "We reject it. We don't want it," Karen shrieked, her voice cracking. "I'm afraid it's too late for that," Mr. Harrison said, his voice devoid of sympathy. "You formally accepted the inheritance 2 weeks ago. Your signature is right here. The law is quite clear. You were in such a hurry." Their sloppy, greedy haste had sealed their fate. Karen turned on me, her face contorted with rage. This is your fault. You knew. You tricked us." I looked at my screaming aunt. I looked at my cousin, who was now sitting on a crate of gilded trash, his face pale and slack with shock. I looked at the mountain of worthless, golden junk. The thematic climax was quiet. I felt a lifetime of being their scapegoat fall away. "No, Aunt Karen," I said, my voice steady. "I didn't do anything. Grandpa left you exactly what you deserved." Then I turned my back on them and walked out of the barn into the sunshine. Mr. Harrison called me a month later. The news was grim and glorious. To cover the massive, immediate tax liability and the legal fees they had incurred, Karen and Ethan were forced to declare bankruptcy. Ethan's new sports car was repossessed. They had to sell their home. They were financially and socially ruined. As for the rest of the estate, as per the will, it was liquidated to pay the taxes. But since Ethan was responsible for the tax bill, and he couldn't pay, there was only one asset left to liquidate. The lawyer had sold the farm, the house, the equipment, everything, to me for the grand total of $1, a fee that was then waived. The farm was mine, free and clear. The story of the Golden Rocks spread through our extended family and the community like wildfire. It became a local legend, a cautionary tale of greed and arrogance. At the next family gathering, no one would even look Karen or Ethan in the eye. They had lost everything, including the one thing they truly valued, their status. It's been a year now. I'm sitting on the old rocking chair on the porch of the farmhouse, which I am slowly and lovingly restoring. My neighbor George is sitting with me, and we're sharing a glass of iced tea, watching the sunset over the hills. The farm is slowly coming back to life. It's hard work, but it's good work. It's my work. My life isn't just back to normal. It's a life my grandfather secretly planned for me. It's a life of peace, hard work, and dignity. I have honored his memory by becoming the man he always knew I was.